While he was serving his country overseas in Israel, his HOA decided to drain his private lake. They thought he was powerless, just another homeowner to bully. You won't believe the multi-million-dollar payback his military squad helped him execute from halfway across the world. Don't miss what happens next when they mess with the wrong soldier. The email arrived at 200 hours, local time. Major Alex Daniels was in a temporary command post in the Negev desert, the air thick with the smell of dust and diesel fumes. For the past 6 months, this had been his world, the hum of servers, the glow of tactical displays, and the immense, silent pressure of leading a joint engineering task force. His connection to his life back in the manicured suburbs of North Carolina was a thin, fragile satellite link, a nightly ritual of scrolling through emails before the next day's operations began. Most emails were junk or routine updates, but this one was from his neighbor, old Mr. Henderson. The subject line was just 2 words. Well, they did it. Alex's stomach tightened. He clicked it open. The message was short, typed in the shaky, all-caps style of an elderly man furious with technology and the world. Alex, they did it. I tried to stop them. Came home from the store and there was a pump truck. That woman, Barbara, was there directing them. They drained your lake. Said it was a mosquito hazard. I'm so sorry. Son. Beneath the text was a single, blurry photo taken on a cell phone. The image was devastating. Where there should have been a shimmering expanse of deep blue water, the heart of his property, there was now a vast, weeping mud pit. The small wooden dock he'd built with his father stood stranded and useless, its legs exposed like the bones of a skeleton. The surface of the mud was littered with the dark, tragic shapes of fish, their lives extinguished for the sake of a bylaw. Alex stared at the image, the background noise of the command post fading to a dull roar. That lake wasn't just a feature of his property, it was a legacy. His grandfather had bought the land decades ago, long before the gated community of Cypress Creek Preserve had even been conceived. He dug the lake himself, creating a private wildlife sanctuary. Alex had inherited the house and the 5 acres of land it sat on, an island of family history now surrounded by a sea of cookie-cutter McMansions. The lake was where he'd learned to fish, where he'd proposed to his late wife, and where he went to find a quiet piece of himself that the Army couldn't touch. And Barbara Kellerman had drained it. Barbara was the self-appointed queen of Cypress Creek, the president of the Homeowners Association. She was a woman who wielded the HOA's Book of Covenants and restrictions like a holy text in a weapon. She saw Alex's larger, older property not as a piece of local history, but as an anomaly, an untidy patch that resisted her vision of perfect, synchronized suburbia. Their conflict had started before his deployment. She'd sent him notices, printed on expensive, cream-colored letterhead. The first was about the species of cattails growing at the water's edge, claiming they weren't on the approved community flora list. The second was a complaint that his dock was made of unsealed pine instead of the HOA-mandated composite decking. Alex, busy preparing for his deployment to Israel, had responded with a polite, firm email explaining that his property predated the HOA and was exempt from its aesthetic guidelines. A fact supported by his property deed. He thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. He had underestimated her venom, her obsessive need for control. The mosquito hazard was a lie, a transparent pretext. He had the water tested quarterly. It was a healthy, balanced ecosystem. This wasn't about public health. This was an act of aggression, a spiteful power play executed while she knew he was 6,000 miles away and powerless to stop her. A cold, quiet rage, unlike any he'd ever felt in combat, began to build in his chest. It was a precise and controlled fury. In his line of work, emotion was a liability. You didn't act on rage. You channeled it. You turned it into a plan. You identified the enemy's weaknesses, their dependencies, their critical infrastructure, and you developed a strategy to dismantle them. He minimized the email, the image of his dead lake burning in his mind. He pulled up a different set of files on his encrypted laptop. These were not military files. They were project proposals, engineering specs, and budget spreadsheets for a civil engineering project his unit had been asked to consult on as a community outreach initiative before their deployment. The project was a new bridge. The proposed Cypress Creek crossing was a multi-million-dollar infrastructure project designed to alleviate traffic congestion on the main road leading to their affluent suburb. More importantly, it would provide a new grand entrance to the Cypress Creek Preserve, a fact the HOA, and Barbara Kellerman in particular, had been crowing about for months. It would, in her words, dramatically increase our property values and community prestige. The bridge's design and feasibility study had been complex. The terrain was tricky, requiring specialized geotechnical analysis because of the project's proximity to a military training area. Alex's own unit, the 74th Engineer Battalion, had been brought in as consultants. They had the expertise, the survey equipment, and the manpower to provide the crucial initial data that the civilian contractors would depend on. It was a gesture of goodwill. Their report, their analysis, was the foundational cornerstone upon which the entire bridge project rested. Their signature was required to move forward. Alex looked at the name of the primary civilian liaison for the project, the person who coordinated between the county, the contractors, and the community stakeholders. The name was Barbara Kellerman. She wasn't just the HOA president, she was the chair of the bridge committee. This project was her baby, her crowning achievement. He looked back at the picture of his muddy, dead lake. Then he looked at the signature block on the bridge proposal. He saw Barbara's looping, arrogant signature, and below it, a line waiting for his own. She had drained his lake to assert her power over his 5 acres. She had no idea he was in a position to assert his power over her entire world. The rage in his chest solidified into a plan. It was audacious. It was devastating. And it was, in a way, beautiful. She thought she had attacked a lone, absent soldier. She had no idea she had just declared war on the entire United States Army Corps of Engineers. He began typing a new email, his fingers moving with calm, cold precision. The subject line was Cypress Creek Crossing, Project Viability Review. This was no longer about a lake. It was about strategy. It was about leverage. And Major Alex Daniels was about to teach Barbara Kellerman a masterclass in both. Major Daniels did not respond with the fury of a wronged homeowner. He responded with the lethal patience of a sniper. In his world, a direct emotional assault was sloppy, a waste of ammunition. The most effective strike was one the enemy never saw coming, one that used their own momentum against them. His weapon of choice was not an angry email, but the dense, impenetrable language of military bureaucracy. He sat in the humming, air-conditioned quiet of his command tent, the image of his dead, muddy lake seared onto his soul, and crafted a message that was both perfectly professional and utterly devastating. The email was addressed to Captain Eva Rostova, a geotechnical engineer under his command, whose mind was as sharp and unyielding as the granite she studied. He CC'd his own commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, a man who valued process and protocol above all else. The message was a work of art in calculated ambiguity. It began Captain Rostova, during a routine review of multispectral satellite imagery and topographical data sets related to the Cypress Creek Crossing project. I have noted significant and previously undocumented hydrological changes in the immediate vicinity of the proposed western abutment location. Initial analysis suggests a rapid and anomalous alteration to the local water table. He continued, requesting that she lead her small, specialized team in a preliminary viability reassessment. He tasked her with using all available remote sensing data LiDAR, ground-penetrating radar scans from previous surveys, and thermal imaging to analyze potential soil substrate instability. He concluded with the kill shot. A sentence wrapped in the velvet glove of military prudence. I recommend all forward progress on civilian contractor coordination and interagency endorsements be temporarily suspended until we can certify, with absolute certainty, the integrity of our initial survey data. Mission readiness and operational certainty must remain our top priorities. He hit send. The email, stripped of all emotion and bristling with technical jargon, shot across the globe, an invisible data packet torpedo aimed directly at the engine room of Barbara Kellerman's ambition. Back in North Carolina, Barbara was inhabiting a different universe, one bathed in the warm, satisfying glow of absolute victory. The draining of Alex Daniels Lake had been more successful than she could have imagined. It was a masterstroke. Not only had she eliminated the eyesore and the mosquito hazard, but she had also demonstrated her power in the most unambiguous way possible. She had proven that no one, not even a deployed soldier, was exempt from her authority. At the next monthly HOA meeting, held in the community's palatial clubhouse with its vaulted ceilings and tastefully beige decor, she was a conquering hero. She stood at the podium, radiant in a crisp linen suit, and surveyed her subjects, the 20 or so homeowners who had dutifully assembled. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice smooth and confident. "I have some wonderful news to report. As many of you have noticed, the board has taken decisive action to remediate the long-standing ecological hazard posed by the unmanaged pond at the edge of our beautiful preserve." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "It was not a decision we took lightly, but your health, safety, and the aesthetic harmony of our community are paramount. This action sends a clear message. Our bylaws are not mere suggestions. They are the foundation of our shared prosperity." A ripple of polite applause went through the room. Only old Mr. Henderson, sitting stone-faced in the back row, remained silent, his arms crossed over his chest like a silent dissenter at a Politburo meeting. Barbara's smile widened. She transitioned smoothly to her favorite topic, her voice swelling with theatrical pride. "And now for the news I know you have all been waiting for. I had a very productive lunch meeting with the county commissioner this week. He informed me that thanks to the invaluable preliminary report provided by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, a testament to our community's excellent relationship with our service members, the Cypress Creek Crossing project is moving into its final funding and approval stage." This news was met with a genuine wave of excitement. The bridge wasn't just a vanity project, it was a solution. It promised to slash commute times, ease the frustrating traffic bottleneck on the main road, and most importantly, provide a grand, impressive Newton entrance to their community. It was the physical manifestation of their exclusivity and rising status. "The groundbreaking is now anticipated within the next 6 months," Barbara concluded, her voice ringing with triumph. "This bridge, ladies and gentlemen, will be our new gateway. It will be a landmark that cements our status as the most desirable and well-managed community in the entire state." The applause this time was loud and sustained. Barbara Kellerman's approval rating had never been higher. She was the queen of her castle, her power absolute, her greatest achievement. The monument to her reign was just on the horizon. For 2 glorious weeks, she lived in this state of blissful self-regard. Then the torpedo struck. It did not arrive in a flimsy, cream-colored HOA envelope. It came via FedEx, a thick, serious packet that felt heavy in her hands. The address label was chilling in its formality. Ms. Barbara Kellerman, Chairperson, Cypress Creek Crossing Citizens Committee. The return address was not some local county office. It was a crest she recognized with a jolt of alarm: the United States Army Corps of Engineers, South Atlantic Division Headquarters. With a growing sense of dread, she slid open the packet. The letter inside was printed on heavy, watermark government letterhead. The signature at the bottom was a sharp, decisive scrawl: Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Wallace. The language of the letter was dense, clinical, and utterly terrifying. It informed her, in no uncertain terms, that all preliminary feasibility, approvals, and engineering endorsements provided by the 74th Engineer Battalion for the Cypress Creek Crossing project were hereby suspended, effective immediately. It stated that due to newly identified geotechnical risks, a full-scale geological and environmental impact review would now be required before any further endorsements or recommendations could be considered by the Army Corps of Engineers. It continued, detailing the potential for unpredictable soil subsidence and hydrostatic imbalance. It estimated the timeline for such a comprehensive review to be, at a minimum, 6 to 12 months, though it noted this was contingent on personnel availability and a reassessment of project priorities. And then, in the cold, brutal final paragraph, came the sentence that made the air leave her lungs. The sentence that connected her petty act of suburban warfare to this catastrophic, federal-level disaster. This comprehensive reassessment has been made necessary by the recent, unsanctioned, and rapid draining of a significant private reservoir and wetland ecosystem located less than 400 yards from the proposed site of the Western Bridge support pillar. This action, undertaken without apparent environmental oversight, presents an unacceptable and currently unquantified risk to the foundational stability of the entire proposed structure. She read the sentence again, her mind refusing to process it. The private reservoir, the unquantified risk, her act of triumph, her symbolic victory over the absent Major Daniels, was now being cited in an official military document as the sole reason her magnum opus, her legacy, was collapsing. It was impossible. It was a waking nightmare. It was an attack from an angle she could never have anticipated. Her phone began to ring, the shrill sound cutting through her shock. The caller ID read County Commissioner Davis. Her hand trembled as she answered. "Barbara, what in the blue hell is going on?" The commissioner's voice boomed, stripped of its usual political charm. "I've just been blindsided by a letter from a Lieutenant Colonel Wallace. He's pulling the Army's endorsement for our bridge. He's talking about soil stability and a drained lake. Do you know anything about this?" She tried to form words, but her throat was dry. I can explain." Before she could, an email notification pinged on her laptop. The subject line was a punch to the gut. Urgent Cypress Creek Crossing Project. Official suspension of all county funding. It was from the county manager's office. The foundations of her world were not just cracking, they were disintegrating into dust. The bridge, the source of her prestige and political capital, had metastasized into a source of immense professional and personal liability. In the space of 10 minutes, she had gone from being the visionary leader of a triumphant community project to the negligent committee chair who had single-handedly jeopardized a multi-million-dollar public works initiative, thousands of miles away, in the cool, quiet dark of the Negev desert. Major Alex Daniels was reading a new email on his secure laptop. It was Captain Rostova's preliminary report, complete with thermal images showing changes in soil moisture and charts predicting potential subsidence. "Major," the final paragraph read, "your instincts were correct. The rapid dewatering of that basin has created a significant hydrostatic imbalance in the surrounding substrate. The soil composition is primarily alluvial clay and sand, and the sudden loss of pore water pressure could lead to unpredictable settling over the next 12-24 months. From a purely engineering standpoint, I cannot, in good conscience, recommend we proceed without a comprehensive on-the-ground survey with multiple core samples. My full report will reflect this. It's a legitimate, demonstrable engineering concern. Sir." Alex closed the file. He felt a cold, clean, and deeply satisfying sense of victory. He had not lied. He had not fabricated a single piece of evidence. He had simply used his professional expertise to shine a very bright, very official spotlight on a problem that his enemy, in her arrogance, had created for him. His satellite phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Henderson. The old man must have heard the shock waves already. "Alex, the rumor mill is going crazy. Something about the bridge being canceled. Barbara Kellerman just drove past my house looking like she's seen a ghost." "What in God's name did you do, son?" Alex looked out from his tent at the dark, alien landscape of the desert, at the stars blazing in a sky uncluttered by suburban light pollution. He hadn't done anything. Not really. He had simply allowed Barbara Kellerman's small act of petty malice to achieve its full, spectacular, and catastrophic potential. He had aimed her own weapon back at her and allowed physics, bureaucracy, and her own hubris to pull the trigger. And he knew, with the certainty of a commander surveying a battlefield, that this was only the opening salvo. For a week, Barbara Kellerman existed in a state of suspended shock, a free fall of disbelief. Her days were a frantic cycle of damage control. She made placating phone calls to furious county officials, assuring them it was all a misunderstanding that she was working diligently to resolve. She fielded emails from the increasingly panicked civilian contractors, whose preliminary mobilization costs were now a massive liability. Her confident, commanding world had been reduced to a desperate scramble to plug the holes in a rapidly sinking ship. The community of Cypress Creek, once her adoring fiefdom, had turned on her with breathtaking speed. The news of the project's suspension, and the reason for it, had spread like wildfire. The bridge wasn't just delayed, it was dead, and Barbara was the one holding the murder weapon. Whispers followed her at the community mailboxes. The friendly waves she was accustomed to were replaced with cold stares and neighbors who suddenly found their hedges fascinating whenever she drove past. Her power, built on the promise of prosperity and prestige, had vanished overnight, leaving only a residue of resentment. Refusing to accept defeat, Barbara decided on a counteroffensive. She would rally her base. She called an emergency community meeting at the clubhouse, framing it as a chance to clarify the facts and outline a path forward. The turnout was double the usual number. The atmosphere in the room was not one of neighborly concern, but of a hostile shareholder meeting. The air was thick with the sour smell of fear and anger. Barbara stood at the podium, her expensive pink power suit looking more like armor than a fashion statement. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice straining to project a confidence she no longer felt. "I know there has been a great deal of misinformation circulating regarding a temporary administrative hold on the Cypress Creek Crossing project." A man in the front row scoffed. "Temporary, Barbara. My brother-in-law is on the County Planning Commission. He said the Army has put a kill order on it. Said it could be years, if ever." "That is a gross exaggeration," Barbara snapped, her composure cracking. "There are procedural hurdles. We are dealing with a complex government bureaucracy. The issue stems from a minor, necessary landscaping action that was unfortunately misinterpreted by an individual who, it seems, does not share our community's spirit of cooperation." Mr. Henderson, who had been sitting quietly in the back, stood up. His voice, though aged, was clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs. "Barbara, are you referring to the landscaping action where you drained Major Daniels's lake while he was deployed overseas?" The room fell silent. He had said the quiet part out loud. "That was a board-approved action to mitigate a documented health hazard," Barbara insisted, her face flushing. "Was it," Mr. Henderson challenged, "or was it you settling a score with a man who wasn't here to defend his own property, because it seems to me that the only hazard was to your ego? And now, because you couldn't leave well enough alone, you've cost every single person in this room a fortune in property value. You didn't just drain a lake, Barbara. You drained our 401ks. The dam of civility broke. The room erupted in a chorus of angry accusations. Barbara stood at the podium, speechless and besieged. Her authority utterly dissolved. She was no longer a leader, she was a pariah. Defeated on the home front, she escalated. She spent 2 days working the phones, trying to find a way to circumvent Major Daniels. She reasoned that he was just one officer. Surely, his commanding officer could be made to see reason, after navigating a labyrinth of military bureaucracy. She was finally given an email address for Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Wallace. Her email to him was a carefully constructed piece of work, alternating between the tone of a concerned community leader and a subtly threatening taxpayer. She spoke of the immense public good of the bridge project and hinted at the unfortunate political optics of a single officer halting its progress. She even offered to personally oversee the complete ecological restoration of the pond in question. The response came in less than 24 hours. It was brief, professional, and colder than a block of ice. Mr. Kellerman, it began on, I am in receipt of your email. Major Daniels is one of my finest engineering officers. When he flags a potential risk to a project's structural integrity, especially one involving civilian infrastructure, he has my full and unequivocal support. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers does not subordinate its rigorous safety and engineering standards to political optics or community disagreements. The suspension of our endorsement is not punitive. It is procedural and necessary. The review will proceed as outlined. Any further inquiries on this matter should be directed through official channels. Thank you for your service to your community. Marcus Wallace, LTC, U.S. Army. Barbara stared at the screen. The polite professional dismissal was more brutal than any angry outburst. She had tried to go over Alex's head, only to find that his head was shielded by the full institutional weight of the United States Army. She was swatting at a hornet and had just run face first into the entire nest, in his command post. Alex read a copy of the email exchange, which LTC Wallace had forwarded to him with a single line of commentary. Good call, Major. Keep me apprised. He felt a grim sense of satisfaction. His commander trusted his judgment. The system was working. Captain Rostova entered his tent, holding a tablet. Sir, we finished the secondary analysis based on the historical satellite data. She said, the land around that drain lake is even more unstable than we thought. There's a subsurface layer of alluvial silt that acts like a sponge. Now that the water pressure is gone, it's starting to compress, it's subtle, but the LiDAR overlay shows a definite subsidence of a few millimeters already. Building a bridge abutment on that now would be criminally negligent. So our concerns are more than just procedural. Alex stated. Sir, Rostova said with a slight smile, our concerns are a goddamn textbook example of why civilian committees shouldn't be allowed to play with pumps. What she did was incredibly reckless. Alex nodded. His squad, his team of engineers, wasn't just supporting him out of loyalty, they were supporting him because he was right. Their professional integrity was now his shield. Cornered, humiliated, and out of options. Barbara Kellerman made one final, desperate move. She managed to obtain Alex's official military email address. Her email to him was a stark departure from her usual tone. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, pleading desperation. Major Daniels, it read, I am writing to you directly to appeal for a reconsideration of the Cypress Creek crossing suspension. I now understand that the draining of your lake was the precipitating factor. I admit, this was an overstep by the HOA board. It was a mistake. We will do whatever it takes to make it right. We will pay to have the lake refilled. We will restock the fish. We will have a professional wetlands consultant restore it to its original condition, at the HOA's expense. Whatever you want. This bridge is too important to our community to let it take over a neighborhood dispute. Please tell your commander that the issue has been resolved so we can move forward. I am begging you. Alex read the email in the quiet of the pre-dawn hours. He looked at her words overstep. Mistake. Neighborhood dispute. She still didn't get it. She thought this was something that could be undone, a simple transaction. She thought she could buy back his legacy with an HOA checkbook. She was pleading for him to call off the attack, not understanding that the torpedo was already in the water, its guidance system locked on. He now held all the cards, and her pathetic plea was the last, desperate bet of a player who had already lost everything. He closed his laptop, the fate of her bridge and her world resting in his hands, 6,000 miles away. He had his answer ready. The silence from Major Daniels was a unique form of psychological warfare. For 3 days, Barbara Kellerman's desperate, pleading email sat unanswered in the bound, indifferent ether of the military's global network. For 3 days, she lived in a state of agonizing suspense, checking her inbox every 15 minutes, her heart leaping at every notification, only to be crushed again by the relentless spam and routine community updates. The entire multi-million-dollar Cypress Creek crossing project, her political future, and her social standing all hung in the balance, dependent on the whim of a man she had wronged, who was sitting in a desert halfway across the world. The pressure was mounting back home. The county had officially frozen all funds allocated to the project. The lead contractor had sent a certified letter informing her that the Citizens Committee was now in breach of contract and would be billed for all mobilization and demobilization expenses, a figure that ran well into six figures. The local news had picked up the story, framing it as a tale of bureaucratic blunder halts major infrastructure project. With her name and picture featured prominently, she had become a local villain, a symbol of governmental incompetence. Finally, on the fourth day, a reply appeared. It was not from Major Daniels. It was from a Sergeant Peterson, aide-de-camp to Major A. Daniels. The email was brief, formal, and utterly chilling. Ms. Kellerman, it read, Major Daniels is currently engaged in mission-critical operations and is unavailable for direct correspondence regarding civilian matters. He has instructed me to inform you that he will address the project concerns upon his return to the United States at the conclusion of his deployment. He suggests you engage with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers through the official channels previously provided. Thank you. It was a dismissal of breathtaking arrogance. He wasn't just saying no, he was refusing to even acknowledge her plea. He was placing her, and her multi-million-dollar crisis, on hold for 6 more months, relegating her to the bureaucratic purgatory of official channels. He was making her wait. The message was clear: you are not important enough for my time. Barbara knew it was over. The project was dead. There would be no recovery. The financial and political fallout would be catastrophic. But a strange, final surge of defiant fury propelled her to make one last stand. She would not go down without a face-to-face confrontation. She would force him to look her in the eye. She spent the next 6 months in a self-imposed exile. She resigned as HOA president. She stopped attending community events. Her once perfect lawn grew just a little too long. She monitored the 74th Engineer Battalion's public affairs website, waiting for news of their return. Finally, the announcement came. They were returning to Fort Bragg, 2 weeks after his boots were back on American soil. Barbara Kellerman, dressed in a somber but impeccably tailored gray suit, drove to Fort Bragg. Through a series of calls, she had managed to secure a 15-minute meeting with Major Daniels, ostensibly to formally discuss the future of the Cypress Creek Crossing project. She was shown into a small, functional conference room. The walls were adorned with engineering diagrams and maps of distant, dusty countries. Major Alex Daniels walked in precisely at the appointed time. He was taller than she had imagined, and his dress uniform, with its rows of ribbons and polished brass, seemed to radiate an authority that made her HOA presidency feel like a child's game. His face was tan from the desert sun, and his eyes were cold and clear. He did not offer to shake her hand. Ms. Kellerman, he said, his voice even and devoid of any emotion. You have 15 minutes. Major, she began, her carefully rehearsed speech suddenly feeling flimsy and inadequate. I am here today, on behalf of the entire Cypress Creek community, to formally apologize for the unfortunate incident regarding your property. It was a grave error in judgment by the former HOA board. We are prepared to offer a comprehensive remediation package, including full financial restitution for any and all damages. He stood silently, his expression unreadable. We have a new board, she continued, her voice gaining a desperate speed. A new direction. The community is still passionately committed to the bridge project. It represents once, progress, a future for our town. All we need is your recommendation to your superiors to lift the suspension. One word from you. Major, that's all it would take to get things moving again. Alex listened patiently until she was finished. The silence stretched for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he walked to the head of the conference table, where a single, thick document lay. It was a copy of the original bridge deal proposal, the one bearing her own triumphant signature. I've read your remediation offer, Mrs. Kellerman, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I've read the meeting minutes from your HOA. I've read the hydrology reports, and I have read the after-action reports from my own engineers. You talk about financial restitution. Let me tell you about what you took. He looked her directly in the eye, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something beyond military discipline. It was a cold, deep, impersonal anger. You didn't just drain a pond, he said. You destroyed a 30-year-old ecosystem. You killed hundreds of fish, bass, bream, catfish. You exposed the nests of turtles and waterfowl. You did this not for public health, but for your own petty satisfaction. You did it as an act of intimidation against a soldier who was serving his country overseas, assuming he was powerless to respond. He picked up the heavy document from the table. You talk about the future of your community. My grandfather dug that lake with his own hands, a generation before your community even existed. That was my future. That was my legacy. You took a piece of my family's soul and turned it into a mud pit to satisfy your ego. He held her gaze. You see, you thought this was a disagreement between a homeowner and an HOA. You fundamentally misjudged the nature of the conflict. You were fighting for leverage. I was fighting for memory. And that's a battle you can never win. With a slow, deliberate motion, he began to tear the thick contract in half. The sound of the ripping paper was loud and violent in the quiet room. It was the sound of millions of dollars, of political promises, of a community's future being irrevocably destroyed. This bridge deal, he said, ripping the document again, into quarters now, was based on a spirit of cooperation between the U.S. Army and the local community, an act of goodwill. Your actions have demonstrated that you are not a community that acts in good faith. Therefore, any cooperation is impossible. He dropped the shredded pieces of the contract onto the polished mahogany table. They lay there like a funeral wreath. The 74th Engineer Battalion's final recommendation to the Army Corps of Engineers will be no-go. We will officially state that due to irremediable geotechnical instability and a demonstrated lack of reliable local project partnership, the Cypress Creek Crossing project is untenable. It's over. There will be no bridge. Barbara stared at the torn paper, her face a mask of utter horror. The finality of his words was absolute. She had come here for a negotiation, still believing, on some level, that this was a transaction. But it wasn't. It was a sentencing. My squad, Alex continued, his voice now dropping to a near whisper, are not just soldiers. They are engineers. They believe in building things that last, on foundations that are solid. You have proven that your foundation, your community's integrity, is rotten. We don't build on rotten foundations. Now, he said, his voice returning to its formal, dismissive tone. I believe your 15 minutes are up. He turned on his heel and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the shredded remains of her ambition. She didn't move for a long time. She just stared at the pieces of paper. The final, tangible evidence of her ruin. She had picked a fight with a soldier about his backyard, and he had responded by methodically, professionally, and completely erasing her world. Alex walked back to his personal office. On his desk was a single framed photo, a picture of him and his late wife, smiling, sitting on the edge of the small wooden dock, their feet dangling in the clear, cool water of the lake. His lake. He had a new battle to fight, and now a long, expensive, and difficult battle to bring it back to life. But as he looked at the photo, he knew it was a battle he would win. He had defended its memory. He had honored its legacy. The war was over, and peace, at long last, was on the horizon, and so our story comes to an end. But this wasn't just a tale of revenge, though it was undeniably satisfying. It was a powerful lesson in authority, respect, and the devastating consequences of underestimating the wrong person. This was not merely a neighborhood dispute. It was a clash between two entirely different worlds of power. Barbara Kellerman's authority was fragile, built on the thin pages of an HOA rulebook. Fueled by petty gossip, and reinforced by her ability to publicly shame others at community meetings. Hers was the power of a queen ruling over a tiny beige kingdom. Her weapons were bylaws, complaints, and a pool pump. She thought draining the lake of a deployed service member was a bold move, a clean strike against a distant, powerless target. But she made a fatal mistake. She violated the sanctuary of a soldier, never realizing that soldier was an expert in an entirely different kind of warfare. Major Alex Daniels didn't wield power from a neighborhood manual. His came from years of training, field experience, and the trust of one of the world's most formidable engineering institutions, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. His weapons weren't outrage or retaliation, they were geotechnical data, bureaucratic precision, and unwavering institutional credibility. When Barbara drained his lake, she didn't just damage a landscape, she desecrated a legacy, a place filled with memories of his grandfather and his late wife. It wasn't just property damage, it was an assault on his soul, on the man behind the uniform. And she woke a man trained to identify strategic weak points. In Barbara's world, the center of gravity, the true source of her influence and status, was the Cypress Creek Bridge project. Alex didn't stoop to her level. He didn't slap her with some petty infraction. He escalated the conflict to a level she could never hope to reach. He turned her spiteful act into a technical, legal liability. He transformed her sabotage into an unacceptable geotechnical risk, and then he used her own actions as evidence to destroy the very thing she cherished most. His team, his squad, stood behind him, not just out of loyalty, but out of professional outrage. As engineers, they were appalled by Barbara's recklessness and ignorance. They weren't just defending their commander, they were defending the integrity of their profession. The final irony, absolutely poetic. Barbara, in her crusade to uphold community standards and property values, became the sole person responsible for destroying the single most valuable asset the neighborhood had ever possessed. In trying to control one man's 5 acres, she sacrificed the future of the entire community. Thank you for joining us for this incredible story of miscalculation and consequence. Major Daniel's story is a powerful reminder that you never truly know what resources someone has or where their boundaries lie. It teaches us that respect isn't optional. It's a strategic necessity. If this tale of calculated surgical retaliation struck a chord with you, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments a time when someone underestimated the wrong person and paid the price. And share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that you don't pick a fight with someone who has more to lose and the tools to protect it than you can possibly imagine. Because in the end, Barbara Kellerman learned one brutal truth. When you try to drain a man's lake, don't be surprised when he drains your entire future in return.